Welcome to the final aha video of this session. And this is my 5th try. These are our final thoughts. And in our final thoughts forum, a few of us had kind of mentioned that we weren't really, thrilled with the Ossett book, as it was light on technology and more heavy on parenting. And as I started doing my final paper, which ends up being about Generation Y workplace, or Generation Y work ethics, parenting, technology, change. One of the reasons where this book went south for me is a place where Ossett was described, and it's like chapter 4, the work ethic chapter, where he says, talking about the older generations, he says they had 2 basic tenets. Hard work will greatly increase the likelihood of reaching your goal, and hard work is virtuous and builds moral character. And then he states that these kids, it seems, don't feel the same need to work hard at all. And it seems to me that he's perpetuating, or actually creating, a stereotype that was really popular in the early part of the 2000s about millennials, how they were lazy, how they were selfish, how they were narcissistic, how they were shallow, how they'd never survive in a workplace because they were too entitled. That doesn't match my own experience. Nor does it match, well, I shouldn't say it doesn't totally match my own experience. There are the stray ones who fit the stereotype, but most of the kids I've dealt with do not. And it made me think, and it made me go, I've got to find out what the previous work ethics were. So I found a couple of things, and it's very odd to be looking for a study that's too recent to be released into databases. But I was looking for a place called Generational Workplace Ethics Fact or Fiction by a scholar named Keith Zabel, and it was too recent to be in Baker's database. It's too recent to be in my school's database. I couldn't pull it up through WorldCat, but I did pull up an article that somebody had used its information and pulled its definition sort of the baby boomers' work ethic, and it was, they tend to place work at the center of their lives, to avoid loathing and to be ethical in their dealings with others. Their work ethic is associated with greater job satisfaction and performance and greater commitment. And as soon as I read that, it clicked to me that Ossett is a baby boomer. And this might be part of the problem, because I am not. I am a Gen Xer. And Gen Xers, which is the other generation before millennials, our definition of work is different. And pulling from actually an article in the Houston Chronicle, which was really interesting on this topic, it described the work ethic of Generation Xers as being one that's skeptical of authority, not respecting hierarchy, status, or title. My generation seeks to work-life balance, and we like informal and fun workplaces. We are self-reliant. We like individual projects. Very little supervision. We don't want to spend hours in meetings. We want high productivity, get our tasks done, and get on with our own free time. And it struck me that a lot of that is, some of the complaints we hear about millennials are actually probably complaints that boomers have for Generation X. But it also struck me that millennials fall somewhere in the middle of these two things. And there's a theory of history by a German philosopher named Hegel that argues that history is like a pendulum swing. You start with a thesis, you go to its antithesis, and then you swing back to the middle, which is the synthesis. And it seems to me that certainly with these 3 generations, and I would not go past them to make this argument, you see some of that. Because the millennial generation's work ethic is actually not nearly as lazy as Ossett would make it to be, or some of these other who buy it, who were presenting this stereotype at the beginning of the century. Time magazine must have run somewhere in there a series or a special issue on this, and it had articles like, it's the me generation. Millennials are spoiled brats, and it's their helicopter parents that are to blame. And all sorts of things of that nature. And as I said, my experience with millennials is different. And as I was doing my research, I kept running against, or not running against, running into lots of articles that argue millennials are bringing a great deal of talent and something new to the table. And that new thing is a very confident awareness and ability to use technology. The very thing Osset thought was ruining them turns out to be their best asset. Yes, they are needy. They like a lot of feedback, preferably positive, but feedback. Yes, they have tight bonds with their family. Yes, they like flexible schedules. Yes, they prefer to wear comfortable clothes to work. Yes, they like a lot of time off. Yes, they may be the freelance generation when it comes to this so that they can work from home. The Generation Xer in me is envious more than critical. But these things have, in fact, made boomers and Xers uncomfortable with millennials, either out of jealousy or fear or whatever, just generational angst on all parts. But it turns out millennials have a good work ethic. It's just different. It is one that says, I need that time and that work-life balance. I am not putting work at the center of my life. And that makes sense because, as Riley said earlier in the semester when I was talking about generations X and Y, Peter Riley, who is an ESL teacher out of Mexico, noted that this generation of millennials, and even some Generation Z, saw their parents lose everything with the Great Recession. And they saw hard work did not pay off the way their parents thought it should. And you've got to admit, you'd be skeptical too. But then again, I'm from a group that doesn't buy into hierarchy. There are reasons that they want these things, but I don't know that they're bad things, and I don't think it makes them inherently lazy or entitled. That they want different things and have different life ambitions. After all, isn't one of the things each group of parents wanting for their children for them to have better and easier lives? So why are they complaining their work ethic is bad when it's just different? And that comes to parenting styles too. Pretty much everything I'm reading about, and there's not a lot about millennial parents, and most of what I'm reading comes out of marketing magazines and marketing journals, which is rather terrifying as someone who did a marketing degree some 30 years ago and never wanted to see stuff again. But it's interesting because the marketers are the ones who are pulling this stuff out, and they're talking about millennials as parents, and as parents, they are not the helicopter parents that they grew up under. They're more pulled back. They're more restrained. They're more aware that they're not going to be perfect. They're more aware that technology can help them if they use it cautiously. They are more moderate in things than their parents, and they're more practical, or so it seems from the research I'm reading and looking at. So that what we're seeing with millennials isn't bad, but really actually simply change. It's a paradigm shift. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just resistance and resentment. So when I come back to Osset, the more I look at it and the more I read it in light of this information, the more he seems very, and I don't remember who said it in the semester, but somebody did say it, conservative. He seems very much that baby boomer generation that put their whole life into work and thought everything good would come out of it, sacrificed a great deal, but then want their kids to do what they tell them to do, not letting them have, some free range. And Generation X parents are just as bad, and they are also the parents of Generation Y as well, so that it's an interesting mix, and it makes perfect sense that millennials would fall somewhere in the middle of these two groups. And so that they're not all bad. They're not entitled. They're not lazy. They're not that selfish. They're not that shallow. They actually do bring a lot of good things to the table. Of course, primarily one of the good things they bring to the table is their knowledge of technology. They are not afraid of it. Um, but as I've also noted, they use it. They don't understand it. They use it. My students are really good at using Google Docs and really bad at figuring out how to share it or how to translate it to a different program or whatever. They're really good at finding an app on their phone, not necessarily sure how to fix their phone after the app crashes it. Then again, neither am I. But they are very comfortable. They don't freak out and go, oh, I dropped. They're very blasé about things like, I dropped my phone, I need a new one. I can remember when my husband dropped his first cell phone. We were late adopters. And we freaked out. You broke it. Oh no, it's broken. My students drop their $500 smartphone. The screen will crack and I'll be like, I can still use it. It's a paradigm shift. It's very different. They don't value the same things. That's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. It's just different. And some of our millennial classmates, you can hear that is carrying on as they make similar comments about Generation Z, who would be some of the younger sisters, younger brothers. And, one of the things about this generational stuff is it's all arbitrary anyway. Yeah, there's groupings, but it's really an arbitrary grouping. Generation X, my generation, has as much to do with Generation Baby Boomer as it does with Generation Y. And Generation Y has learned a great deal from Baby Boomers. They are the most diverse generation. They are the most comfortable with their diversity. They have never gone to segregated schools. The concept is foreign to them. Mention segregated schools to your kids in class or your kids at home and they'll look at you like you're crazy. They don't know what that means. They are much more open-minded than some and than previous generations. This is also a really good skill in the workplace or talent. So that what we see with millennials, it shouldn't threaten us, but then change is threatening to a lot of people. We don't like it. But as Sam Cooke says, a change is going to come. And it's going to come whether we want it or not. And it's better to embrace change than to fight change. It's less stressful, you live longer, and you enjoy the ride. Maybe that's my Generation X coming out in me. It's been a fun class. Y'all have been great classmates. I've learned a lot from y'all. And good luck in future endeavors. Have fun.